Bearded dragons need a gradient of temperatures within their enclosure to be able to live a healthy lifestyle, and then these temperatures need to drop at night to mimic their natural conditions. But how do you actually go about controlling these temperatures? Well, the recommended way to put heat into a bearded dragon's enclosure is using a heat bulb from above. And this heat bulb will slowly heat up the enclosure as it gets warmer itself. But if you just left this heat bulb on running, then eventually it would keep heating up and keep heating up until your bearded dragon was burnt. And that is not what we're aiming for. So we need to find some sort of mechanism to heat it up just enough to get the bearded dragon warm enough, but also to leave the cool gradient temperature towards the other end of the enclosure so that the bearded dragon can also cool off. The way that people control this heat bulb is by attaching it to a thermostat. And this thermostat will have a probe that also goes into the enclosure. So typically you would have your heat bulb here, and the heat bulb would come out of the enclosure with a wire, and then the plug would attach into a thermostat unit, and then that thermostat unit has a temperature control on it, and then a probe that also goes back into the enclosure. So you've got this one unit with the thermostat on that you control the temperature of, that's attached both to the heat source itself as well as to the probe that is monitoring what the actual temperatures are inside in the area you're trying to control. And what would typically happen is you wouldn't want to set this probe up in the hot end, because as soon as that bulb comes on, it's going to instantly heat up the probe and probably turn it off too quickly. And you don't really want to set it down at the coldest end either, because generally the heat isn't going to, it's sort of a slow process for it to get there, and it's quite difficult to maintain the correct, like not too high a basking temperature if you're trying to control it from the very cold end. So typically what I would do is I would set up my probe about 3/4 of the way down the enclosure towards the cold end, but not fully down there. And then I would set that ambient temperature as something sort of in the mid, slightly higher range of what I want the cold end to be. So for my bearded dragon, I have it about 3/4 down the enclosure and set at 27 degrees Celsius, with the target of the actual cold end being 22 to 25 degrees Celsius. Once you've got your probe set in place, then there's usually just a dial that you have to turn to set that temperature to where you want it to be. And then you should already have some sort of digital thermometer system in place to monitor both the hot and the cold temperatures. And it's just a matter of adjusting exactly where the probe is and what temperature you've set it at to make sure that over the course of the day, both the hot and cold end are staying within the ideal range of temperatures. There are different types of thermostats that you can use, and they control the bulbs in different ways. But for the types of heat bulbs that are generally used in a bearded dragon enclosure, it's recommended that you use a dimming thermostat. So what this does is, as it detects that the temperature is getting towards that limit, so for me 27 degrees Celsius, the bulb itself will start to dim slowly so that it sort of tapers out at 27. And this is opposed to just turning on and off instantly, which can wear out your bulb much faster and also can be annoying to the bearded dragon, who is potentially on and off throughout the day having this light flashing at it and then losing the light, which isn't really mimicking the natural conditions that we're trying to get. Now, one thing to bear in mind is that the amount of dimming will depend both on the temperature set and also the size of the bulb, so the wattage. So, for example, if you end up using too large a bulb, what this means is that the bulb will turn on and it will suddenly blast out a lot of heat. And this means the probe will heat up much faster and it will start to turn the bulb off and dim it much quicker, which means that the basking area over the period of a day doesn't get as much heat as it would if it was a smaller bulb that wasn't dimming that quickly and was just gradually heating everything up. So the way that it works out is that if you're finding that your bulb is dimming a lot of the time and your cool end is maintaining its temperature but your hot end isn't getting hot enough, it might just be that you actually have too big a bulb and the bulb is dim most of the time, because when it puts out all of that power, it just heats the probe up on the cold end far too quickly and gets turned off. So if you try downsizing the bulb, for most of the day, your bulb should be near full power rather than dimmed, to keep the basking surface constantly having the right temperature being put at it, and to also slowly maintain that cold end with a slightly lower intensity of wattage. And really, this is just about getting to know your size and style of enclosure and how it works best within your environment. So for example, with me, I live in a fairly cold environment, and I have a 5 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot enclosure. So it's 5 foot long, 2 foot wide, and 2 foot tall. And for me, a 100-watt bulb works perfectly fine, whereas some people find that they actually need a 150-watt bulb for the same enclosure, but in their different environmental conditions. So this is all just a matter of playing around. But in general, if you're going for that sort of size, 4 to 5 foot bearded dragon tank, I'd start with the 100-watt bulb and see if that is able to heat it well enough first. The final bit of control that you need to be able to exert on the enclosure is the timing of the heat. So heat is wanting to be on throughout the day, as it would mimic the natural sunlight that they're getting, but then you want it to be off during the night, because the night should naturally cool down to a lower temperature. And the way that you can do this is either remembering to turn the lights on and off at the same time every day, which can be a bit tedious and sometimes your routine just doesn't allow it. So instead, you can do what I do and what most reptile keepers do, which is to set this thermostat onto an automatic timer. So remember, the heat bulb is plugged into the thermostat is then plugged into the wall. You can just put a timer onto that final plug so that this heating system automatically goes on and off at the same times every day. If you found this video helpful, then make sure to subscribe to my channel to learn more about the videos that I'm going to be putting out about setting up a bearded dragon's enclosure.